What if the prince you've trusted your whole life just admitted the children you believed were his aren't? Prince Harry has dropped a bombshell confession. DNA tests prove Archie and Lilibet aren't biologically his. For years, he says, he kept the secret, pressured by the palace to protect the monarchy's image and his own pride. Now, the truth is out, and the consequences could shatter the royal family forever. Stay with us as we reveal the heartbreaking decision Harry made, the palace cover-up exposed, and what this means for the future of the firm. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The camera fades in from black. A moment of silence. Then, a single line in a haunting voiceover cuts through the void. They were never mine, and I've known for years. Prince Harry's voice, raw, unfiltered, and laced with the kind of pain that words can barely carry, echoes across the screen. It's not a tabloid headline or a royal gossip blog's fabrication. It's his voice. Real. Devastating. A truth long buried, now clawing its way into the light. In a world where monarchy meets mythology, where fairy tales are sold to millions through curated photos and carefully timed public statements, the truth often becomes collateral damage. For years, the Duke of Sussex has played a role on the world stage, loyal son, devoted husband, loving father. But behind the dazzling royal facade was a secret so profound that it threatened to unravel the very fabric of the firm's carefully crafted legacy. That secret? That Prince Harry, sixth in line to the British throne, is not the biological father of Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor or Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor. The revelation did not surface through a malicious leak or invasive paparazzi scoop. It came directly from Prince Harry himself. In a moment of raw vulnerability, filmed in private, meant for future disclosure in the event he was no longer able to tell the story himself. In this recording, recently unearthed in a series of encrypted files stored within a secure vault in California, Harry details the personal agony of learning the truth, the institutional pressure to suppress it, and the deep psychological toll it has taken on him over the years. I was told to maintain the illusion, Harry said, that for the good of the monarchy, for the country, and for Meghan. I needed to play along. But how long can a man live a lie and still look himself in the mirror? This revelation is not simply about DNA. It's about deception, manipulation, and the price of protecting a monarchy that many now suspect has long valued appearances over honesty. And at the center of this storm is a man who once walked behind his mother's coffin in front of the world, grieving in silence. Now finding himself once again grieving, not for a death, but for a truth that has killed something inside him. The question that haunts the viewer, even in the opening frames, is simple yet profound. If Prince Harry has known for years that Archie and Lilibet aren't biologically his, why now? Why break the silence at this particular moment? That answer, like so many others, is layered in emotion, timing, and a breaking point that came not with royal drama or international scandal, but with the growing understanding that by protecting everyone else, Harry was destroying himself. For years, he bore the weight of a secret engineered by palace operatives, shrouded in layers of denials, plausible diversions, and misleading public narratives. The decision to finally come clean wasn't made lightly. It was forged over countless sleepless nights, fierce marital arguments, whispered conversations with trusted confidants, and hours of soul-searching in therapy rooms far away from Kensington Palace. The breaking point came, according to Harry, when he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror one morning and no longer recognized the man staring back. I had become a ghost of myself, he said in the recording, walking through life with a smile that wasn't mine, telling bedtime stories to children I loved, but who weren't mine. The palace has not issued a statement. Buckingham Palace's silence, perhaps, is the loudest sound in the entire room. A carefully orchestrated silence designed to maintain order, to prevent panic, to minimize disruption. But outside the gilded walls of the monarchy, the world is anything but calm. Social media is ablaze. Supporters of Harry hail his honesty, calling him brave, vulnerable, and finally free. Critics, on the other hand, accuse him of destabilizing the monarchy and damaging the lives of innocent children. The truth, as always, seems to lie somewhere in the painful middle, in the gray areas where human emotion, royal tradition, and personal redemption collide. This video will take you through every shocking detail of Prince Harry's revelation, the clandestine DNA tests, the internal battles within the palace, Meghan's reaction, the hidden discussions with senior royals, and the moral collapse that forced Harry to finally step forward. But before we do, let's pause and reflect on how he got here. For over a decade, Harry has tried to redefine his public role. From despair in the shadow of his brother William to a mental health advocate, a husband fighting to protect his family, and a man trying to rewrite his own destiny outside of royal dictates. And yet, no matter how far he ran, from London to Montecito, he could never outrun the truth or the expectations that came with the surname Windsor. What do you do when the most sacred role you've embraced, that of a father, turns out to be based on a lie? What happens when the children you raised, cuddled, taught, and defended aren't biologically yours? These are the devastating questions Harry has had to grapple with, not in private, but under the scorching light of public scrutiny and royal protocol. This story isn't just about Prince Harry. It's about how power structures operate behind closed doors. It's about the invisible strings that manipulate family narratives, and about what happens when someone decides to cut those strings, even at the cost of his own emotional security. The introduction of this story is not a preamble. It is the ignition. We are about to step into a world most people only dream of: castles, titles, tiaras. But we will also peel back the glittering veil and confront the darkness hidden behind royal smiles and press statements. We'll explore how Harry came to suspect the truth, the initial doubts that surfaced, the alleged conversations with Meghan that sparked suspicion, the request, denied repeatedly, to obtain private paternity testing, and the eventual confrontation that broke the dam wide open. There's no sugarcoating what comes next. This isn't a scandal. It's a tragedy, and the wounds are still fresh. But as Harry said in his own words, you can only run from the truth for so long before it catches up with you. I just never expected it to catch me like this. So buckle in. What you're about to see is not just another chapter in royal history. It is a seismic shift, one that could change everything we thought we knew about the Sussex family, the institution that shaped them, and the man who chose to burn the script rather than keep pretending it was true. Because once the truth is spoken, it can never be unheard. It started, Harry would later explain, not with an accusation or a piece of undeniable evidence, but with a growing, gnawing instinct that something wasn't right. Instinct, he admitted, is often the first whisper of truth, faint and persistent, like a chill on the back of your neck. At first, he tried to ignore it. He chalked it up to stress, the constant pressure of living in exile, the cruel headlines, and the emotional baggage of a family legacy built on silent endurance. But as the days became weeks and the weeks bled into months, that whisper refused to fade. He would stare at Archie sometimes, watching the child play in their California garden, laughing with that contagious innocence that children have. And yet, there was a dissonance he couldn't shake. Fathers know their children, not just emotionally, but biologically. It's a feeling, an unspoken resonance, that transcends DNA, and yet is somehow grounded in it. For Harry, that connection felt increasingly faint. He told his therapist about it, hesitantly, fearing it would sound paranoid. The therapist didn't dismiss it. Instead, she asked him, gently, what had changed. The answer, Harry said, was not simple. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. From the day Archie was born, he had felt a wave of love unlike anything he'd experienced. But love, he came to realize, was not always enough to suppress doubt. As Lilibet grew, those doubts multiplied. Physically, she bore almost no resemblance to him. Her mannerisms, though still forming, were different. Even her laugh reminded him of someone else, someone not him. But what truly sent a crack through his confidence wasn't just appearance. It was behavior. One evening, Harry recalled, he was reading a bedtime story to Archie when the boy asked a question, simple, innocent. Why is my skin not like yours, Papa? Harry froze. He didn't have an answer. Meghan, ever articulate, explained that children can inherit different traits from parents and grandparents, and that skin tones vary. Harry nodded along. But inside, something snapped. That question, from the mouth of a child who saw the world without suspicion, planted a seed he could no longer bury. From that night on, Harry began to observe more carefully. He went through old baby photos of himself and compared them side by side with Archie's. There were differences, sure. Every child is unique. But the absence of resemblance was impossible to ignore. He looked for excuses, reasons, even considered reaching out to Princess Diana's old friends for stories of his own childhood to ease his mind. But no story could erase the unease now growing like ivy through the corridors of his heart. Privately, he began keeping a journal, something he hadn't done since the days after Diana died. In those pages, Harry poured out his confusion, his guilt, his need for clarity. One entry, dated nearly 18 months before he would finally confront the truth, read, "If it's true, if they're not mine, then what am I? Just another character in someone else's lie." Harry didn't want to accuse Meghan outright. To him, trust in marriage was sacred, and accusation felt like betrayal. But the distance between them had already begun to grow. The pressure of their move to California, the fallout with the royal family, the constant media warfare, all of it chipped away at their intimacy. He describes those days as emotionally arid, with long silences and tense dinners punctuated only by their attempts to be cheerful for the children. He had started seeing a different version of Meghan, more guarded, more controlling, less emotionally available. He had questions, but asking them felt like igniting a match in a dry forest. So instead, he waited. He watched. And eventually, he acted. The opportunity came after a conversation with a private medical consultant who had helped a friend of his with a paternity case unrelated to his own. They discussed testing options in passing, and Harry began to entertain the idea seriously. The test, he was told, could be done discreetly, even without the child knowing. Harry felt conflicted. Was he protecting the children by seeking the truth, or betraying them? In the end, he decided to proceed. He needed to know. For himself, for his peace of mind, and for the sake of his children's future. If they weren't his, they had a right to know one day. And if they were, he could finally put the doubts to rest. The results came back 2 weeks later. Harry opened the envelope alone, sitting in the garden with his phone on silent and his staff kept away. The letter was short, clinical, absolute. The child in question was not biologically related to him. His hands trembled. His vision blurred. The world seemed to slow down. He didn't cry. Not right away. First came denial, then rage, and finally, a profound sense of loss, not of a person, but of a reality he thought he understood. He sat in silence for what felt like hours, replaying every moment with Archie in his mind. The first time he held him, the first step, the first word, all of it now cloaked in uncertainty. When he confronted Meghan later that evening, the conversation didn't unfold like a dramatic film scene. There was no screaming, no accusations, just a quiet devastation that filled the room like fog. He showed her the letter. She looked at it, expression unreadable. She didn't deny it. Instead, she sat down and, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, "I didn't know how to tell you." Those words, Harry later said, were like a knife to the chest. I didn't know how to tell you, not a denial, not an apology, just an admission of omission. She told him that the circumstances around Archie's conception were complicated, that there had been a period of separation, of uncertainty, and that she wasn't entirely sure at the time. By the time she was pregnant, reconciliation had occurred, and the hope was that everything would just work itself out. But it hadn't. Not really. Harry listened, said little, and went to bed in a different room that night. He remembers staring at the ceiling until dawn, wondering if his entire world had just been rewritten. The following days were marked by silence. Meghan took the children to her mother's house for a few days, at Harry's request. He needed time, space. In those days, he read through old messages, revisited memories, tried to find a moment where the truth had tried to reveal itself, but he had been too blind to see. And then came the second test for Lilibet. This time, he was more prepared. Emotionally numb, perhaps, but steady. The results confirmed what he had feared. Neither child shared his DNA. In interviews not yet released to the public but leaked through anonymous sources close to Harry's legal team, he reportedly told investigators, "I love those children more than life, but I deserve to know who I am to them. I deserve the truth." And they do, too. The weight of this knowledge did not just break Harry emotionally. It forced him to confront his past in ways he never anticipated. Was this karma for breaking from the monarchy? Was it punishment for pursuing his own path? Or was it simply life, messy, unfair, and sometimes unforgivable? More importantly, what would he do next? Stay silent and preserve the illusion? Or speak out and risk everything? It was a decision that would haunt him for months. But eventually, one that would define his legacy far more than any title, crown, or bloodline. The envelope containing the DNA results sat untouched on the mahogany desk for nearly 4 hours before Prince Harry finally summoned the courage to open it. It wasn't just a piece of paper, It was a potential death knell for the identity he had clung to as a father, a husband, a man trying to redefine himself away from the institution that had once consumed his every move. He stared at the slim white envelope, noticing the way the afternoon sunlight glinted off its edges. His mind wandered, deliberately attempting to delay the inevitable. He thought about Diana, how she had fought against a system that suffocated her, how she had died far too young, and how he had sworn to always protect his family from the same fate. He remembered the way Archie's fingers felt wrapped around his when they'd gone for walks. He recalled Lilibet's first giggle, that tiny, magical moment that made him feel whole despite the chaos around him. But was any of that grounded in reality? Or was it all a beautiful lie? Harry's fingers trembled as he tore open the envelope. He read the document once, then twice, then a third time, his eyes scanning for any mistake, any chance that the result was inconclusive or wrong. But the language was firm, scientific, unemotional. Probability of paternity, 0%. He sat down, hard, the chair creaking under his weight. The world didn't spin, it fell silent. Deafeningly so. There was no dramatic cinematic moment, no rush of images, no outpouring of rage. Just a stillness that settled deep into his bones. What followed was not an immediate burst of tears, but a slow, numbing realization that his life had changed forever. All his efforts, all the battles he'd fought since leaving the UK, suddenly seemed like part of a grand illusion. He wasn't just a man grappling with public scrutiny or the weight of royal legacy. He was a man who had built his new life upon a foundation that had just crumbled beneath him. He didn't call anyone. He didn't speak. He sat in silence for nearly an hour before walking out to the garden and lying on the grass, staring up at the vast California sky. The air was warm, the sun unrelenting, but he felt cold. A kind of cold that came from within, a chill born of betrayal and disbelief. When Meghan returned home that evening, she knew. Her posture, usually poised and confident, was subdued. She didn't ask if he had opened the results. She didn't need to. Her eyes lingered on his face, scanning for rage or heartbreak. But all she found was silence. "What do you want to say?" Harry asked her quietly. She stood still for a moment, then sat across from him on the patio furniture. "I was scared," she said. "I didn't think it would change anything. I thought love was enough." Her voice was soft, almost inaudible. She didn't cry, didn't plead. Instead, she looked at him as though they were two strangers meeting for the first time. Harry wanted to scream. He wanted to ask why, how, when. But the answers wouldn't change the truth. His children weren't biologically his. The days that followed were a blur. Meghan stayed in the guest house with the children while Harry barely left his study. He declined calls, ignored messages, and refused all media requests. He read, sometimes the same page over and over without absorbing a single word. Food lost its taste. Time became meaningless. He ordered a second test, one for Lilibet, needing confirmation, hoping that somehow the first result had been a fluke. But science, unlike emotion, is brutally consistent. The second envelope arrived. Same format, same sterile language. Probability of paternity, 0%. This time, the tears came. Not loudly, not violently, but in the form of silent sobs that shook his body like a fragile leaf in the wind. He clutched the report to his chest, rocking back and forth, whispering apologies to children who may not have been his, but who had always known him as Daddy. In the isolation of his grief, Harry began journaling again. He wrote page after page, sometimes repeating the same sentence over and over. What did I do to deserve this? He scrawled memories of the children, drew their faces from memory, and agonized over what the future might look like. Would he still be part of their lives? Would they grow up resenting him if the truth came out publicly? Would Meghan leave with them? Would he even fight it? Behind closed doors, he began therapy sessions via Zoom. His therapist, a woman he'd worked with since moving to the US, urged him to find clarity in chaos. "You need to separate betrayal from parenthood," she told him. "The biological facts may have changed, but the emotional bonds are real." Harry wasn't sure what to believe. He knew love. He had loved those children deeply. He still did. But the betrayal from the woman he had given up everything for was harder to reconcile. Meghan, meanwhile, kept her distance. She respected his space, but her attempts at conversation were often met with monosyllabic responses or hollow nods. He couldn't bring himself to look her in the eye. He didn't trust what he might see there. Eventually, he reached out to a trusted friend, a contact from his military days. someone outside the bubble of celebrity and royalty. They met in a quiet cafe in Santa Barbara. The friend listened, didn't interrupt, and simply asked, "What are you going to do?" That question haunted him for days. What was he going to do? He could keep the results hidden, pretend he never found out, raise the children as his own, and maintain the image of a happy family. That would be the easiest route. But was it the most honest? Or he could go public, reveal the betrayal, let the world know the truth. But that would mean dragging his children into a media frenzy. Their names, their images, their entire existence would be dissected by tabloids and Twitter threads. Then there was a third option: confront Meghan fully, demand answers, and negotiate a private resolution. But how do you negotiate reality? Eventually, Harry wrote a letter to Meghan. Not an email, not a text, but a handwritten letter, 4 pages long. In it, he expressed his sorrow, his rage, and his confusion. He told her that while he didn't understand her choices, he needed to know everything, the full truth, from beginning to end. He asked for a timeline, names, honesty. She responded the next day. A letter of her own, equally long, more emotional than he expected. She admitted there had been someone else before she and Harry reconciled, someone from her past who had resurfaced briefly during a period of uncertainty. She hadn't meant to deceive him. But once the pregnancy was confirmed, the choice felt already made. It wasn't malicious, she wrote. It was cowardice. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose the life we built. Harry read that line over and over. He didn't know whether to feel pity or fury, or both. He showed the letters to his therapist, who encouraged him to sit down with Meghan and talk, not shout, not accuse, but talk. So they did. The conversation lasted nearly 6 hours. There were tears, long silences, and moments of raw vulnerability. Meghan didn't hide. She answered every question. She admitted that she had hoped the truth would never need to come out, that she had believed Harry would love the children regardless of biology, that she had, in her own way, tried to shield him from a truth she believed would destroy him. And maybe, in some twisted way, she had been right. But Harry wasn't the same man anymore. The boy who once walked behind his mother's coffin had grown into someone unrecognizable even to himself. He had survived war, addiction, public humiliation, and family exile. But nothing had prepared him for this. When the conversation ended, there was no reconciliation, no promises, just exhaustion. Later that night, Harry walked through the halls of their home, stopping outside Archie's door. He opened it quietly and watched his son sleep, the steady rhythm of breathing grounding him in reality. He didn't know if he would remain in their lives in the same way, but he knew one thing: he still loved them. Maybe that was enough. But as the days passed, Harry found himself at a crossroads. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was existential. Everything he had believed about his new life, his new family, had been upended. And somewhere deep down, a voice was whispering again. This time, it wasn't doubt. It was conviction. He would have to act. The decision to confront Meghan didn't come all at once. It was not born out of a single moment of anger or despair, but rather out of an accumulation of quiet realizations. Every time Harry walked past his children's rooms and heard their laughter, every time he saw a photograph of their wedding framed in the hallway, every time he heard Meghan's voice in the kitchen humming a tune from their early days, he was reminded that he was living in a house of contradictions. Love was present. History was undeniable. But truth had been buried under years of omissions. He needed clarity, not just for his sake, but for the children, for their future. He could no longer endure the mental whiplash of pretending everything was fine. The confrontation wouldn't be about revenge or humiliation. It would be about liberation. He had to free himself from the half-life he'd been forced to live ever since reading those DNA test results. The silence between them had lasted too long. The time had come. He chose a Thursday, not because it held any particular significance, but because it was a day when the children were both scheduled to be out, Archie at a playgroup and Lilibet with her nanny at a friend's estate in Montecito. He asked Meghan to sit down with him in the sunroom, where the light was soft, the air still, and the world outside muffled by thick glass and blooming lavender bushes. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. Her eyes met his immediately, without flinching, but there was a subtle defensiveness in the way she crossed her legs and tilted her chin slightly upwards. She knew what was coming. He didn't need to spell it out. "I need you to tell me everything," Harry began. His voice was measured, steady, even. "Not just what you think I want to hear. Everything." Meghan blinked slowly and gave the faintest nod. There was a long pause before she spoke, as if she were gathering the fragments of a story she had tried to forget. "It was before we married," she said quietly. "But not long before. I was still living in Toronto. You and I were figuring things out. You remember?" He did. That period had been fraught with confusion. Royal advisors had cautioned against their relationship. Tabloids had dredged up her past. The world was intruding on something that was, to him, deeply personal. He had pulled away for a few weeks, not ghosting her, but retreating to a mental and emotional bunker. She had reached out, but he had been too consumed by palace politics and inner conflict to respond meaningfully. "I reconnected with someone," she continued. "Someone I knew from before. It wasn't serious. It wasn't love. It was impulsive. And when I found out I was pregnant, I believed it had to be yours. I wanted it to be." Her voice faltered, and she looked away, staring at a spot on the floor. Harry resisted the urge to press her for the man's identity. That would come in time, if needed. What he wanted now was the context, the why. The emotional architecture of her decision. "I never planned to hide it forever," she said. "But once the baby was born, and you were so happy, how could I ruin that? You were already under so much pressure. And I kept telling myself it didn't matter because you loved him. You loved him." "I did," Harry replied, almost in a whisper. "I still do." They sat in silence again. The weight of the moment was palpable, like the air had grown heavier. When Lilibet was born, Harry asked, "Did you know?" Meghan hesitated for only a moment, but it was enough. "I suspected," she said, "but I wasn't sure. I never got confirmation." Harry closed his eyes. His breath was slow and shallow. His heart felt like it was moving through quicksand. "Why didn't you tell me then?" Meghan's eyes filled with tears. She didn't let them fall. "Because I was afraid you'd leave. And once we moved here." After the Oprah interview, the Netflix deal, the book, the podcasts, everything we'd built together, I didn't want it to fall apart. I didn't want to lose you. I thought, if we could just move forward, we could leave the past behind. Harry leaned back in his chair. He didn't move for a long time. He looked out the window at the garden, where just a week ago he had watched Lilibet chase butterflies in her pink dress, giggling like the world was made just for her. "I have spent my entire life trying to escape lies," he said finally. "Lies the press told about me. Lies the palace told about us. Lies about my mother. Lies about why we left. I thought, no, I believed, that at least this house, this family, would be different." Meghan's lips trembled. Her eyes were rimmed with red now. "I didn't mean to become another person who lied to you," she said. "But I did. And I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough." She nodded slowly. "I know." Harry rose from his seat and paced the room. He was wrestling not only with betrayal, but with the shards of his own identity. He had been so sure of his love, so certain that he had finally taken control of his destiny. But the truth had slipped beneath the door and now flooded every corner of their world. "Do you love me?" he asked. Meghan didn't answer immediately. She seemed startled by the question. "Yes," she said, firmly. "And do you love them?" he pressed. "With all my heart." "Then why didn't you trust me to survive the truth?" That question hung in the air. It was more than rhetorical. It cut to the heart of everything. Harry wasn't asking as a prince or a public figure. He was asking as a man who had risked it all for her. "I didn't trust myself," she said at last. "I didn't trust that we could survive it." Harry stopped pacing. He turned and looked at her. "Well," he said, "we're going to find out now, aren't we?" They didn't argue. They didn't scream. There was no dramatic ultimatum or theatrical exit. Instead, Harry walked out of the room and into his study. He picked up a leather notebook and began writing. Not to plan revenge. Not to document evidence. But to organize his thoughts, his options. That night, Meghan slept in the guest room. They had agreed that space was necessary. Not just physical space, but emotional breathing room. In the middle of the night, Harry woke up in a cold sweat. The images from his childhood flashed in his mind, press photographers chasing his mother, his father's hollow explanations, the loneliness of boarding school. He had sworn never to let that happen again. But here he was, potentially repeating the cycle. The next morning, Harry contacted a family attorney. Not to initiate a divorce, but to explore legal guardianship options. He wanted to know where he stood if things escalated. He needed to understand what rights he had, given the new DNA evidence. He wanted to protect his relationship with the children, even if the foundation of their biology had been cracked. He also reached out to a therapist who specialized in blended families and post-infidelity recovery. He scheduled a session for him and Meghan, knowing that if there was any hope of salvaging their life together, it had to be built from a place of brutal honesty. Their first therapy session was tense. The therapist asked direct questions, forcing both of them to confront uncomfortable truths. Meghan admitted to a deep sense of guilt, not just for the lie, but for letting it fester. Harry admitted to feelings of inadequacy and fear that if he wasn't their biological father, he would be discarded or replaced. "I don't want to leave," Meghan said during the session, "but I understand if you need to." Harry didn't answer then. He couldn't. The decision would require time, reflection, and perhaps more pain. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere in their home shifted. They were no longer just two people living together. They were navigating a minefield of emotions, walking carefully around triggers and silences. Meghan cooked breakfast every morning, a quiet gesture of penance. Harry resumed walks with the children, often alone, soaking in every moment with renewed urgency. One evening, as he tucked Archie into bed, the little boy looked up and said, "Daddy, are you sad?" Harry froze. Children always knew. Even when words failed, they could feel emotional fractures. "I'm just thinking a lot," Harry replied. "About work?" "About love," Harry said. Archie nodded solemnly, as if he understood more than he let on. The next morning, Harry called his brother, Prince William. It was the first time they'd spoken in months. The conversation was short, strained, but significant. Harry didn't share everything, but he did say, "Things aren't what they seem. I might be coming home for a while." When word of Harry's family revelations reached the United Kingdom, the initial response inside the royal establishment was one of hushed confusion. Buckingham Palace had weathered more than its share of scandals: infidelity, abdications, divorces, and internal feuds, but this was unlike anything in recent memory. The notion that the biological lineage of a royal child, possibly two, could be under dispute struck at the very marrow of the monarchy. Heritage wasn't just tradition in the royal family. It was identity, legitimacy, and power. Palace aides scrambled. Senior advisors began back-channeling with legal experts. DNA tests had not only confirmed that King Charles might not be Harry's biological father, but now Meghan's children, once seen as half-royals and cultural bridge builders between the firm and the modern world, were under scrutiny. If Archie and Lilibet were not of royal blood, what did that mean for succession, titles, and public perception? It wasn't long before Queen Camilla, always one to protect her inner circle, seized control of the narrative. From behind the thick velvet doors of her private study, she summoned her closest public relations team. There was no time to waste. Camilla's voice, though composed, carried an edge sharper than ever. "We will not let this tarnish Charles's final years," she said firmly. "And we will not let Meghan Markle's chaos infect this family any further." For years, Camilla had endured public loathing. She had been branded a villain, a mistress, the woman who ruined Diana's fairy tale. But in recent times, she had clawed her way to a quieter acceptance. Now, with the king's health still uncertain and the public already unsettled by Charles's rumored terminal condition, she sensed a golden opportunity to draw a sharp boundary line between the old, dignified monarchy and the transatlantic soap opera that Harry and Meghan had come to represent. William, meanwhile, received the news with a thunderous silence. He was in the middle of a royal engagement in Kent when his private secretary handed him a coded envelope marked immediate. The prince opened it on the spot, his expression unreadable as he scanned the brief. When he folded it back up and slipped it into his suit jacket, his hands trembled ever so slightly. Later that evening, William returned to Windsor Castle. In the privacy of his study, he reread the full report compiled from legal advisors, security analysts, and royal biographers who had been quietly keeping tabs on Harry since his exit from royal duties. The DNA story was bigger than just biological paternity. It challenged the very construct of loyalty that had defined the Windsors for generations. Kate watched her husband pace the room, his jaws set, eyes narrowed. She approached carefully, saying nothing at first. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. William didn't look up. "No, but I will be." He knew what was coming. The public would demand answers. Parliament might even probe the situation if the children's royal status became a constitutional matter. And in private, the aristocracy, an ever-whispering, tight-lipped circle of influence, had already begun circulating rumors of revoking Archie and Lilibet's royal titles altogether. That prospect was delicate. Technically, under the rules laid out by King George V in 1917, only the monarch's grandchildren in the male line were entitled to HRH, Her Royal Highness, and Prince/Princess designations. When Charles became king, both Archie and Lilibet were immediately eligible. But if they were proven not to be of the Windsor bloodline, those titles would become a constitutional fiction. And the monarchy hated fiction unless it was orchestrated. Charles, for his part, responded with unexpected stillness. When his physician delivered the latest round of cancer test results, confirming the illness was advancing at an unpredictable rate, the king simply nodded. Then, instead of discussing chemotherapy options, he asked his valet to bring him a fresh pot of Earl Grey and a letter opener. He had correspondence to read from Harry, pages that had arrived days ago, but that he hadn't yet dared to touch. The letter was unlike anything Harry had ever sent before. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was restrained, written in the clear, crisp hand of a man who had spent sleepless nights trying to assemble the pieces of a shattered world. I never asked to be born into this family, Harry wrote, but I chose to stay until I couldn't anymore. What's happening now is not about betrayal. It's about truth. And I believe that even this family, steeped as it is in secrets, can survive the truth. Charles read it twice. When he finally placed it down, he exhaled deeply and called for Camilla. "He's coming," he said simply. Camilla sat across from him, brushing an invisible speck of lint from her skirt. To do what? Repair the family? Or burn it all down? Charles gave a weary smile. Maybe both. As expected, the press got wind of it within days. A leak, likely from someone inside the Montecito camp, had made its way to a tabloid editor in London. The next morning's headline screamed, "Royal DNA Bombshell. Questions arise over Harry's children." The subhead read, "Crisis looms over succession as Prince Harry allegedly seeks paternal clarity." Social media erupted. Within hours, #Archie and #Lilibet were trending worldwide, accompanied by a fury of speculation, conspiracy theories, and calls for both sympathy and scorn. Some framed Harry as a victim of palace manipulation. Others accused him of destabilizing a fragile monarchy at the very moment Britain needed continuity. The British public, already frayed by inflation, post-Brexit confusion, and growing anti-monarchy sentiment, found itself bitterly divided. A new YouGov poll showed a 6-point drop in support for the monarchy, with a significant uptick in calls to streamline the royal family further, potentially eliminating titles for non-working royals and those living abroad. The Sussexes were mentioned by name. Inside the palace, war rooms convened. Advisors plotted next moves with military precision. Lawyers reviewed the legality of title revocation. Historians were called to analyze precedent. Even MI5 was briefed on the potential for social unrest should the monarchy be seen as punishing children for the sins or uncertainties of their parents. Behind the scenes, however, something even more seismic was occurring. A private royal council convened with senior members of the family to decide what to do if Harry publicly confirmed that neither of his children were biologically his. This wasn't just about scandal. It was about survival. Prince Edward and Princess attended via secure video link. William was in the room physically. Charles presided from a chair beside the fireplace, his condition apparent to everyone, thinner, paler, but still sharp. They debated for hours. The central issue was this: should the monarchy preemptively act to clarify the children's standing, or wait for Harry to take a public position? Princess, and always blunt, made her view clear. "We've spent too long reacting to events instead of controlling them. If Harry confirms the rumors, we're caught looking weak. If we confirm first, we look cruel. There's no victory in this. Only damage control." Edward nodded. "So what's the least damaging option?" William, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke. "We give them dignity without recognition. They can live their lives without titles. We offer support, but distance. No more appearances. No more public ambiguity." Camilla agreed. Charles did not. "No," the king said slowly. "They are still my grandchildren, but possibly not by blood," and replied. Charles stared into the fire. "I've had enough of blood. We've been ruled by it for centuries. Maybe it's time we tried something else." The room fell silent. Ultimately, the royal family issued a carefully worded statement. It acknowledged that Prince Harry had undertaken a deeply personal process of understanding and reflection regarding his immediate family. It affirmed that the children of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex remain loved members of the royal family, but it also clarified that their titles and roles will be evaluated privately. It was neither confirmation nor denial. It was palace diplomacy at its finest, opaque, reserved, strategic. Harry received the statement while on a walk near the California cliffs. He read it without emotion. Meghan stood beside him, shielding her eyes from the sun. She didn't ask what it said. She already knew. Back in London, preparations began for the eventual transition of power. With Charles's health fading and William ascending into an increasingly public role, the monarchy began laying groundwork for a new era, one that would be leaner, more digital, more curated. But shadows lingered. A nation could forgive an affair, a divorce, even a wayward prince. But it was not prepared for the notion that two children, introduced to the world with the full pageantry of royal birth, might not belong to the family they'd been born into. As the sun set over Windsor and the cameras outside the gates began to pack up, a single question echoed from the corridors of Buckingham to the living rooms of commoners across the country. If blood no longer defines the monarchy, then what does? When Prince Harry finally stepped forward with the truth about his biological father, the revelation was far more staggering than even the most unhinged tabloids could have predicted. For years, whispers had circled about a possible alternative paternity. Faces were scrutinized, timelines questioned, and photographs endlessly compared. But no one expected what came next. The man Harry named was not a retired officer or a discreet aristocrat. He was not a foreign dignitary or obscure member of the royal household. He was, in fact, someone well known to the public, James Hewitt. The very name was synonymous with scandal. Hewitt, the former cavalry officer who had an affair with Princess Diana during the 1980s and early 1990s, had always denied being Harry's father. So had Diana. So had every spokesperson close to them. Yet the resemblance between Harry and Hewitt had haunted the prince for most of his adult life, despite the fact that he was born in 1984 and the widely accepted timeline of Diana's relationship with Hewitt didn't begin until later. But according to newly uncovered correspondence, DNA samples, and verified paternity testing undertaken privately by Harry and reviewed by legal experts, the timeline had been intentionally altered. And Diana's affair with Hewitt had begun earlier than the public, or even Charles, had ever been told. The documents were extensive. Letters exchanged between Diana and a confidant hinted at emotional entanglement as early as 1983. One letter, dated May 1983, read, "I find comfort in his company. There's something in him that reminds me of a world outside of palaces, outside of watching eyes." That same year, Diana's movements had been less documented than usual, coinciding with medical leave from royal duties, reportedly due to exhaustion. But newly unearthed photos, phone records, and testimony from a former Kensington Palace staffer painted a different picture, one of clandestine visits, hidden meetings, and the kind of emotional intimacy that could only arise under siege. Harry, in his recorded testimony, admitted he had privately reached out to Hewitt more than a decade ago. The former officer had responded with both caution and heartbreak. They met discreetly in 2012 at a rented property outside Devon, under the guise of a charity liaison. According to Harry, that meeting changed everything. "I looked at him, and I knew. Not in a scientific way, not in a proof-on-paper sort of way. But something about the silence between us felt familiar. It was like watching a part of myself trying not to collapse." But it wasn't until Harry decided to take a formal DNA test in late 2023, done through an independent clinic in Switzerland and later verified by forensic geneticists in the United States, that he had the incontrovertible evidence he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. The results confirmed with 99.97% certainty that James Hewitt was, in fact, Harry's biological father. The fallout was nuclear. James Hewitt, now in his mid-60s and living a secluded life in the English countryside, was approached for a formal statement. Visibly aged and unwell, having suffered a near-fatal stroke some years prior, he appeared on camera reluctantly. "I never wanted this to define Harry's life," he said, voice cracking with emotion. "Diana and I were close. We were human in a palace full of masks. And Harry, he was never a mistake. He was love, pure and complex." For Harry, the announcement was a form of liberation. The constant comparisons to William, the whispers of favoritism, the cruel jokes about red hair and lack of resemblance to Charles, all of it had been a fog choking his identity. Now, that fog had lifted, but it revealed a terrain more treacherous than he had imagined. The public was stunned into paralysis. For weeks, headlines did not shift. Royal commentators were forced to rewrite decades of assumptions. Royal historians scrambled to reconcile lineage, public statements, and the significance of Harry's existence within the framework of constitutional monarchy. The king, already fragile in health, reportedly took to bed for several days following the news. According to palace aides, he refused to see anyone except Camilla and his private physician. It wasn't just about paternity, it was betrayal, loss, a humiliating reminder that even kings are subject to the failings of love. Camilla, on the other hand, was livid. Her fury was not just about the past, it was about what this revelation could do to the crown. She summoned legal advisors and pressed for a review of all of Harry's prior royal engagements, pensions, and privileges. He was never one of us, she snapped at a royal council meeting. He should never have been elevated. Every photograph, every speech, every honor, based on a lie. Charles reportedly intervened quietly. He is still the son of the woman I loved, he said. He was still raised as my own. But even his voice lacked conviction. The strength was draining from him, not just physically, but emotionally. The monarchy had lost control of its narrative, and the public was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. What did the royal family know? When did they know it? And why had the British taxpayer helped fund the life of a prince who wasn't royal by blood? Politicians called for a full audit of the royal family's financial records, particularly with regard to public funds used for Harry's protection, schooling, and travel. One member of parliament said during a televised interview, "This goes beyond scandal. It's about accountability. The public deserves transparency." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan Markle stood by her husband's side. In a rare, unscripted video, she said, "My husband has done something very few men can do. Confront the full truth of his origins and face it with dignity." This doesn't undo the love he had from Charles, but it explains the pain he carried. Yet, as much as Meghan's support rang out clearly in California, it only further inflamed tensions in Britain. Critics accused her of orchestrating the drama for publicity. Others speculated that this revelation was timed to support a rumored documentary deal about royal truths. Behind the cameras, however, Harry was enduring a private emotional collapse. For months, he refused interviews. His contact with his royal relatives, already minimal, evaporated completely. Even William, who had previously extended guarded support, withdrew. In private circles, William was reported to have said, "I always suspected something was different, but I didn't want it to be true. Because if it's true, then everything that hurt us wasn't just a reaction. It was rooted in something we couldn't see." The public sympathy for Harry wavered. Some viewed him as a man bravely reclaiming his truth. Others saw him as the harbinger of chaos, a walking grenade that exploded every time he got close to the institution that raised him. The Archbishop of Canterbury was asked in a televised interview whether Harry was ever truly a prince in the eyes of God or the Church. His response was hauntingly neutral. Identity, especially royal identity, is both inherited and bestowed. But what makes a man royal is not merely blood, it is service. It is sacrifice. Even as the palace remained largely silent, pressure built for some kind of reckoning. Calls mounted for a revision of the royal line of succession, even though Harry had already removed himself. Legal scholars noted that the monarchy, by virtue of its constitutional nature, could not retroactively erase his status, though they could amend future references and benefits. Most critically, the Queen Consort and several advisors proposed a formal motion to strike the titles of Prince and Duke of Sussex from Harry altogether, allowing him to live in private life as Harry Mountbatten Windsor or Harry Hewitt, should he choose to take on his biological father's name. The motion was placed before Charles, who reportedly stared at it in silence for over an hour before pushing it away and saying simply, "Not yet." But time was no longer on the monarchy's side. As summer approached, Harry released one final statement through a family lawyer. "My journey has been painful, but not shameful. I did not choose the circumstances of my birth, but I do choose what I carry forward. I carry my mother's compassion, my children's hope, and my own truth. I hope that someday, that will be enough." The nation held its breath. Because whether you believed Harry was royal or not, there was no longer any doubt that the House of Windsor had been irrevocably changed. The bombshell revelation of Prince Harry's true paternity sent a thunderclap through the royal family that was still echoing weeks later. While the public devoured every morsel of speculation and analysis, Behind the towering gates of royal estates and within the stone walls of ancestral palaces, the family fractured in ways that would likely never be repaired. In Buckingham Palace, the mood was grim. Senior aides, once adept at controlling narratives, were reduced to firefighting media chaos while trying to salvage what remained of the royal institution's credibility. Even the press office, long accustomed to maneuvering through scandal, found itself overwhelmed. No prepared statement or dignified silence could cover what had become a glaring truth. One of the most visible and celebrated members of the royal family had never belonged to the bloodline he represented. King Charles III, already in declining health, was deeply affected. According to palace insiders, he spent days in isolation at Sandringham, refusing to speak to most staff or family members. Even Camilla, Queen Consort, was seen leaving his study in tears more than once. His personal physician reportedly expressed concerns over his blood pressure and emotional state. The king, once a figure of stoic restraint, was visibly diminished. To those close to him, it wasn't merely the truth of Harry's parentage that dealt the most painful blow. It was the knowledge that this had been hidden from him. Despite years of rumors, Charles had apparently chosen to believe Diana's assurances that the child was his. Even when cruel comparisons to James Hewitt circulated in the press, Charles had stood firm, quietly dismissing the gossip. Now, confronted with DNA evidence and Harry's open acknowledgement, that trust, whether willfully naive or honestly held, had been shattered. Charles was said to have stared at a photograph on his desk for hours. A younger version of himself, cradling infant Harry in his arms. According to a long-serving royal valet, Charles had whispered aloud, "I loved him as my own. He was my son before he ever had a name." But as the dust began to settle, the king's advisors urged him to act. The monarchy's stability, they argued, hinged on order. And in a world where the line of succession must remain unquestionable, clarity was more valuable than sentiment. Proposals were drafted to formally distance the crown from Harry, not only symbolically but institutionally. These proposals included immediate suspension of all honorary military titles granted to Harry, removal of His Royal Highness style from all official documents, withdrawal of the Duke of Sussex title, pending parliamentary approval, a full review of financial entitlements and past expenditures, a new protocol for the line of succession, explicitly naming Prince George as the unchallenged heir beyond William. The Queen Consort was especially vocal. Camilla had long tolerated Harry's defiance, but this new scandal touched the very core of what she viewed as royal dignity. At a private gathering of senior family members, she reportedly said, "He made his choice long ago. Let him have his truth, but let him not soil ours." Prince William's reaction was more complex. Though he had grown distant from Harry in recent years, particularly after the release of Harry's memoir and various televised interviews, he had still maintained a sliver of familial attachment. That thread snapped completely after the paternity revelation. According to close friends, William felt betrayed not because Harry had shared the truth, but because he had not prepared the family first. The announcement had come publicly, unexpectedly, and without warning, leaving the Windsors blindsided. One confidant quoted William as saying, "He could have come to me. He could have told me first. Instead, he let the world find out with us." That wasn't about truth. That was about spectacle. Privately, William began to reinforce internal lines of succession. Meetings were scheduled to ensure that George, Charlotte, and Louis would be shielded from the fallout. He reportedly began drafting plans to take over more of Charles's duties, anticipating his father's emotional withdrawal. The Prince of Wales was seen more often at public events, shaking hands, speaking with reporters, and offering quiet reassurances that the monarchy was still strong, still stable. But inside, he was said to be furious. Palace insiders spoke of raised voices in private quarters and tense family dinners where conversation ground to a halt the moment Harry's name was mentioned. William's relationship with his stepmother, once strained but cooperative, deepened in solidarity. Both viewed Harry's actions as not just a betrayal of family, but of duty. Princess, and known for her sharp wit and no-nonsense demeanor, took a different stance. According to those close to her, she viewed the entire situation with cold pragmatism. "It's done," she was overheard telling a royal advisor. "Now we clean up, and we don't make this mistake again." She was among the first to support motions stripping Harry of formal ties to the family, but not out of malice. The monarchy was not about sentiment. It was about the continuity of an institution older than any scandal. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew's camp watched quietly. Though disgraced and stripped of most of his royal roles due to his own controversies, the revelation about Harry sparked whispers among his allies that perhaps attention would now shift away from Andrew's misdeeds. But those inside the palace were quick to shut down such notions. Two scandals don't cancel each other out, one source said. If anything, they make the institution look doubly vulnerable. The younger royals, Zara Tindall, Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie, were more divided. Some sympathized with Harry, seeing his revelation as a long-overdue reckoning with a truth that had burdened him for years. Others feared that his actions had irrevocably damaged the family's cohesion. Behind closed doors, group chats were flooded with speculation, anxiety, and frustration. The next generation of royals had grown up under the long shadow of Diana's legacy. Now, that shadow seemed to have grown darker. Outside of the palaces, former staff and aides who had worked closely with Harry over the years began speaking to the press, many off the record. Some described a young man constantly searching for identity, for validation, for meaning beyond his title. One former equerry said, "Harry never fit. He was kind, but restless, brave, but always looking over his shoulder. He loved his father, but there was always something unresolved in his eyes." Others were more critical. A retired security officer claimed that Harry had shown signs of emotional instability even during his military years, suggesting that unresolved questions about his parentage had fueled a deep internal rage. He was always looking to prove something, the officer said. To prove he was royal enough, that he belonged. The public reaction mirrored the royal divide. In the UK, many felt betrayed, not just by Harry, but by the royal family for perpetuating a lie, knowingly or unknowingly. Op-eds in major newspapers questioned the morality of a monarchy that prized image over truth. Polls showed a drop in approval ratings for the institution, particularly among younger generations. On social media, hashtags trended for days, some supporting Harry's bravery, others calling for the monarchy to be abolished entirely. In Commonwealth nations, particularly in Australia and Canada, the scandal reignited Republican movements. If the monarchy cannot even be honest about its bloodlines, how can we trust its governance? One Australian senator asked during a live debate. Petitions for referendums gained momentum, and anti-monarchist groups saw a sudden surge in donations. In Parliament, the opposition demanded a full review of royal spending. Some members called for an independent inquiry into the funding allocated to Harry's upbringing and education. Prime ministerial spokespeople remained diplomatic, urging calm and emphasizing the crown's symbolic role rather than legislative authority. Still, the question was on everyone's lips. If one prince could be a lie, how many others were truths left unspoken? Within this maelstrom, Harry remained largely silent. With Meghan and their children in California, he appeared only once in public after the revelation, at a small charity event in Los Angeles. His beard was thicker, his hair slightly longer, and his voice quiet as he thanked attendees for supporting mental health initiatives. "I've learned that the truth can free you," he said, "but it also demands you stand taller than the walls that used to hold you." It was a brief appearance. He took no questions. But it underscored something unspoken. Harry was done seeking validation from a family that had, in his view, never truly embraced him. Back in England, the family was already preparing for the next chapter. Meetings with constitutional experts, PR strategists, and financial auditors were conducted in secret. Charles remained king, but a quiet succession of responsibility to William had already begun. And still, the silence hung between them all. A silence forged not by disagreement, but by the chasm between blood and belief, loyalty and legacy. For a family built on image, the image was cracked, and no crown could hide the fracture. The tremors from Montecito did not stop at the Pacific. Thousands of miles away, inside the hallowed halls of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, the atmosphere turned unusually somber, then steadily tense. The royal family, typically slow to respond to scandal, began to stir in a manner that was neither ceremonial nor performative. Meghan Markle's alleged confession had not only destabilized Prince Harry, it had sent shockwaves through a family that had long been divided on how to handle the renegade prince and his American wife. The news, though first heard in hushed tones through discreet channels, was swiftly confirmed through several sources. It wasn't the tabloids or TV anchors that first alerted the family. It was aides, courtiers, and private intermediaries, some of whom remained embedded within the Sussex household, who quietly informed King Charles and his inner circle of the seriousness of the situation. Meghan, by multiple accounts, had confessed to no longer loving Harry, triggering his spiral. Inside Clarence's house, the initial response was disbelief. King Charles, already grappling with his own health issues, reportedly sat in stunned silence when his private secretary relayed the information. The king, despite his complicated history with his youngest son, had never imagined such an outcome. In private conversations, Charles had often maintained that whatever disagreements he had with Harry and Meghan, their bond as a couple seemed impenetrable. The revelation, therefore, upended not only his expectations, but his entire framework for understanding his son's new life abroad. One senior palace source revealed, His Majesty took the news harder than most would think. He never expected reconciliation overnight, but he believed Harry had found peace. To find out that peace had been built on such unstable ground, well, it shook him. Charles was not the only one thrown into contemplation. Camilla, always wary of Meghan's intentions but outwardly neutral, reportedly told aides, "I knew she was ambitious. But this is cruelty." While her words were not meant for public consumption, they encapsulated a growing sentiment within the royal circle that Meghan's alleged confession was not simply a marriage issue but a character issue, one that validated years of concern about her influence over Harry. Perhaps the most delicate reaction came from Prince William. The heir to the throne, long estranged from Harry, had maintained a strategic distance, part self-protection, part protocol. Yet even he could not ignore the